Well, that was impressive. It's 11 o'clock on the dot, and my team working on in the background is doing an awesome job getting us started right away. So I guess we'll just go ahead and kick off. I'm not sure exactly who's with us right now, but if you are, you're welcome to use the comments and whichever social media platform, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, or if you're joining us in StreamYard, you can go ahead and make comments and we see them all. And every once in a while, if your comments are important enough to throw in onto the screen, I'll do my best to, we'll do our best to address them. But first of all, I just want to thank Jason for being here today. Thank you for collaborating with us on this. I wanted to collaborate with you, Jason. You are CEO or general director. I'm not sure what the correct terminology. I'll let you introduce yourself, of the Psilocybin Assisted Therapy Association. I want to make sure that people in this industry have access to resources, and I want to be able to introduce them to those people when needed. And so, Jason, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your organization?
Yeah, thank you, Justin. I really appreciate it, and appreciate all the support that Calyx is providing. Not only to the Psilocybin Assisted Therapy Association, PATA, but also to the movement in general. You're huge supporters, and just appreciate the sincerity that you bring as an individual and supporting the industry to grow. Psilocybin Assisted Therapy Association is a national nonprofit. We're volunteer-led. And yes, so I'm Jason. I'm the Chief Business Officer, founded with my wife and the Chief Clinical Officer, Lisa Ritter. So I come in with a nonprofit background, and she's a licensed mental health provider. Both of us are very advocates and passionate about how psilocybin in particular, but psychedelics overall, can be helping individuals address their mental health concerns. Our focus is around supporting individuals that are really addressing more serious mental health issues. It could be traumas, PTSD, something that's really keeping them from living the life that they want. Separating it out from other, perfectly acceptable, uses of substances. It could be socially, it could be for spiritual exploration. Any of those, what our focus on and our mission is how do we promote psilocybin assisted therapy to address the national mental health crisis. And we do that by providing educational and empowerment materials. So how do we educate and empower licensed mental health providers or other clinical folks, along with the individuals actually doing the administration. So they could be licensed facilitators, they could be underground, they could be an integration specialist, whatever term somebody might want to use. That you have the professional aspect, the licensed professional aspect, the licensed administrators, and then the seekers. But how does everybody align and work together for the ultimate outcome of the seeker's mental health? And that's what we provide, a lot of free materials to make sure that everybody has access to understanding, including what Justin and Calyx are providing, of how do the businesses navigate, because if they can't be successful, we're not going to be helping the folks really dealing with the mental health. So that's our overriding. We have a lot of resources online. Feel free to check those out. I can type in our web address, so please feel free to utilize those either with your clients, share the information so that just more people really understand what's going on in the industry, and that really people can be healing. So thank you.
Thank you, Jason. And yeah, just a quick Google search probably would do the trick, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a big proponent of psychedelics and the use of it for therapy. I had my own first psilocybin experience when I was 17, and up until that point, I had experienced a lot of trauma, a lot of different kinds of issues that I hadn't really been able to process as a kid. And then I had that opportunity with a friend of mine who had already had experiences with psilocybin. he said, this would be really good for you. I was able to procure them. This was like 1970 or 1970, 1997, 97. And so I felt like the universe like handed them to me, like it was a little bit of a different environment then. And it was a mind-blowing experience. And from that point on, I was a proponent. I even grew them myself. I gave them to people. I was like, this is the answer to all of your existential issues. And let alone, after over time, like recognizing like legit medical values in clinical settings and those kinds of things, and how that would help. And it's just gotten way bigger. And we have this mental health crisis, which I think is like a $500 billion industry, or $300 billion. I don't want to overestimate, but $300 billion industry, and very ineffectual, right? So I just am so excited to be able to be here in Southern Oregon at the right time, right place. I'm an accountant. I've been working in the cannabis industry for 10 years. And Southern Oregon, of course, is a big grower population. And so I was called to address the tax and accounting considerations that cannabis industry had. And then I was well positioned with a lot of experience that dealing with the legal landscape of cannabis, and then being kind of very aware of the legal complexities of the psychedelics industry early on, before Oregon's psilocybin program, and now working with the very first service centers doing psilocybin services, and we're filing tax returns. I feel so fortunate to be able to be kind of in the background supporting that, even though I do love working with people one-on-one. Now I'm working with people who are working with the people, which is very, I feel very good about that. And with the psychedelic industry, that the legal landscape is very complex. And so I want to be able to shed light on that. And then, I'm not an attorney, so that my information only goes so far with that. But I definitely can overlap with attorneys in kind of understanding decriminalization versus regulation. That's something that people need to kind of understand. And how can a person who is providing services for money be successful, be compliant, be able to file a tax return and use the system as the system is meant to be used for getting lending, making sure that you're paying your taxes and staying out of trouble. I'm very compelled to do presentations like this because there's a lot of misinformation. So like in Oregon right now, first state to have a statewide program, there's a lot of terrible information coming out of people like myself who are doing accounting for this industry, primarily because of what's called 280E, which is essentially a tax penalty on the people who are in business of providing a Schedule I substance. So cannabis, as you know, is a Schedule I, and I think we got somebody on, John. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if John was meant to be a guest, but he's certainly a guest to watch this presentation. But and it can be very expensive. So in the cannabis industry, well, let me start out with what is 280E, and I'm gonna talk about 280E quite a bit because people need to be aware of it. You need to be aware of whether or not it applies to you. You need to be aware of that there's methods to mitigate the impact of it, and then and then I'll go on to talk a little bit about giving some business advice in terms of like legal structures and those kinds of things for people who are operating in the industry, and what's the best way to help them. Yeah, so I'm wondering if you can share more in the legal banking field. Yeah, so that's something I think we'll probably save kind of towards the end. It's an easy answer. And I mean, it's not as straightforward as going and getting a bank account, but it can be addressed. So what is 280E? It was a tax penalty that was used by the federal government to crack down on organized crime. I don't know if you know it, but in the 90s, because of 280E and because of taxes, that's how they brought down so many people in the organized crime world. And so I think it had like good intentions, because they did in the 90s, they wiped out like organized crime in the US, like US based organized crime. I mean, they're still around and everything, but they're much less prolific. There's not as many murders. They're not like murdering each other on a day-to-day basis when it comes to the traditional organized crime coming from prohibition and whatnot. The people who like created Las Vegas. And but unfortunately, we're now like left with it. They never got rid of it. And essentially what 280E is that you can't take your ordinary business deductions as a business that is touching a Schedule I substance. Manufacturing, selling, retailing. If you are taking possession of a Schedule I substance, then you are subject to 280E, which means that you can't deduct your rent or your payroll costs or your advertising costs or any of that. The only thing that you can deduct as a trafficker of a Schedule I substance is your cost of goods sold. So in Oregon, where we do have service centers, the only thing that those service centers can legally write off under 280E face value, if you understand face value, what 280E is at a face value, is the cost of the medicine. So you buy the cost of the medicine to resell to your patrons or your clients, and that is what you can deduct, nothing else. Nothing else. So from the surface, that looks awful, right? Because that means you can't deduct rent. You cannot deduct, you can't deduct all the expenses, the facilitator costs. You can't deduct all of these from a surface level understanding of 280E. And in the cannabis industry, it's very much akin to like a dispensary, where if no methodology is taken to mitigate 280E, they end up with 80 to 90% effective tax rates, typically in the state of Oregon and other states. So it is actually very terrible and very impactful, but fortunately for the psilocybin and the psychedelic industry at large, the accountants who have been working in this industry to help their clients in the cannabis industry mitigate 280E have not created methodologies, but found methods to make that 280 impact much better for them, so that they can stay in business and be successful. So who is subject to 280E in the psychedelics industry? Again, it's only businesses that are touching the medicine. So if you are a business that is buying the medicine for resale, or if you're manufacturing, or if you're wholesaling, then that is a trafficking company, and you are subject to 280E. Okay. Now, you are going to maybe hear a lot about like strategies to mitigate 280E. If you go to an attorney and you are anticipating going into business, then you going into business for yourself and being like a service center, you're going to get a wide variety of recommendations on how to set the business up so that you to address 280E. Fortunately, the psychedelics industry is not the same as the cannabis industry. The cannabis industry is a commodity type of business where the whole intention is to sell cannabis, whereas the psychedelic industry is more a service-based type of business. It's the selling of the medicine is a very small amount of the income that you're generating, and the most of the income is coming from the services, from the sitting, from the facilitation, from the retreats, or whatever it is that you're doing in this industry. That's where your income is coming from. And so there is an argument, and it has tax court precedents. You can look it up, MAPS, or not MAPS, I apologize, CHAMPS, Californians Helping Alleviate Medical Problems. It was a nonprofit that was providing medical services to patients, but at the same time providing cannabis to them. And they were a nonprofit, but the IRS audited them, stripped them of their 501c3 status, and then adjusted their taxes to remove all deductions, so that essentially they ended up going bankrupt over it, because now instead of being able to take their deductions, they had to pay tax on gross revenue, which is an awful lot of taxes. They went back and appealed, and then ultimately won. They said that, well, we are not selling cannabis. Selling cannabis is not our primary form of income. It's actually the caregiving services that we were providing. That is where we're making our money. And they won in that court case. They won. The tax courts ruled in that company's favor and said, okay, we're going to give you the deductions that were related to the services that you're providing. So that gives us like a lot of ammunition. And kind of going back to what I was saying before I went on to that, attorneys will attempt to structure businesses so that it bifurcates the services side of it from the actual sale of medicine. And so now one strategy to kind of mitigate 280E is to have like this two business strategy. The pros are it does an effective job at like identifying what is income from room fees, what is income from the facilitation and the services, from what is actually being what income is being generated from the sale of the medicine, and then those expenses are what would ultimately be disallowed, whereas all of the services expenses would be allowed as a service business that is non-plant touching. The downside to that is that the IRS can pretty much pierce that relationship if things aren't done very, very well. If it's kind of lax in terms of like, okay, an employee of the service-based company is working for the medicine company, or vice versa, and of course it's owned by two different people, then you have kind of like this commingling of resources. And if you have that commingling of resources, then it's not too difficult for the IRS to just say, hey, this is two different, this is the same business, okay? This is the same business, and so now it's all subject to 280E. And then you really would have to argue, okay, no, this is the service-based company. I honestly think that, I don't think that there's a lot to worry about here. I think that if you were to be audited and got a very naive auditor and wasn't willing to work with you on this, and you had to go to tax court, the worst of it would be having to go to tax court, which could be pretty expensive that way. There are levels of, like, if you were to go to the tax court of appeals, you do get the opportunity to negotiate with somebody. Okay, so, and then if you get somebody who's reasonable and you're like, listen, like this is we've got CHAMPS, we know that this is the sales, this is the income for the services, and this is the sales from the medicine. Based on precedent, we know that if this went all the way up, it would be very difficult for the IRS to win and be able to apply that 280E at face value there. So I think that what you might hear from the industry, from the candidate or from the accountants, is a lot of doom and gloom and a lot of like extra complexity that needs to be done in order to allocate expenses and that kind of thing, to make sure that, you know, some of the expenses will be subject to 280 and some of them won't be. I'm just saying, like, beware of that. Like, beware of being too afraid of 280E, because there are methods that you can take in order to mitigate it. My personal view is that you want to keep it as simple as possible. You want to be able to you know, avoid unnecessary costs for managing a lot of complexity. And oftentimes people have a hard time doing that anyway. And again, if it's complex, then there's a lot more energy and resources that have to go into maintaining that complex structure. My personal and my firm's personal recommendation is just to keep everything under one entity, and to maintain one set of books and one payroll account and one lease agreement. And then what we can do is use another method, a backup method, or our primary method, which is a 471C inventory methodology that we've been using for 5 years since it was passed in 2018. To allow a lot more flexibility. It's a little bit of a higher level, there's a little bit of higher level accounting acrobatics when it comes to this, but we've been using it successfully to mitigate our clients in the cannabis industry's taxes or 280E hit for years. And what 471C is essentially is more flexibility in determining how you want to track inventory, okay? And then therefore, what we can put into cost of goods sold. And when it got passed, there was a lot of accountants that were saying that 471C was the end of 280E, that it gave us the opportunity to deduct all expenses. And unfortunately, it caught the attention of the IRS. And actually, it was the governing body of the IRS that it caught its attention, and the IRS did put out some regulation telling the cannabis industry you can't use 471C to mitigate 280E. You can't do what you're doing. You can't include these overhead costs into cost of goods sold. You have to disallow them. But and they did a really good job. They like deterred a bunch of people, like a bunch of accountants, like 99% of the accountants that were using a 471C methodology stopped using it. They went back to old methods, and their clients suffered for it. But what they didn't do is like look under the surface. And under the surface, the IRS does not write tax code. The IRS interprets tax code, okay? So what that meant was that when we went back to the tax attorneys and really got an understanding of what this regulation was, it was only a deterrent. It had no teeth. If taken to tax court, they would not be able to defend, their position, because there's nothing in the tax code that says the cannabis industry can't use it. Now, I'm not saying the language is not no cannabis industry, you can't use it, but it is essentially in response to the cannabis industry taking advantage of 471C. And they said, hey, if expenses were otherwise disallowed due to another tax code section, then you can't use 471. And And so, but the thing is, again, they don't have anything in the tax code to say that we can't use it. So we continue to use it. And other things have come out, like we've learned that the IRS hasn't been adjusting tax returns for businesses that were using 471C. Okay, we've heard that they don't really want to take it to tax court because they don't believe that they'll win a tax court case. So what the IRS has done essentially is just left it alone. Okay, this is the big takeaway. It's complex, but it's a big takeaway that there is this other methodology that could be applied to psychedelics as well, plant touching businesses, and so we use 471C, and we've been using it successfully with 0 audits, and let's see, has 471C been successfully defended in this context? I have not had anybody have to go to bat for 471C, even though we've been doing it for 5 years and do hundreds of business returns every year. I have never had a client who has had to go and defend it. Okay, so that's, and we've also heard from other people, that other tax attorneys and whatnot, that the IRS doesn't want to take it to tax court. I'm not saying that there wasn't fallout, but I'm just saying that so far the fallout from using 471C has been, from my perspective, little to none at this point. So how would we use that? How would we use 471C in a service center environment? So 471C is us saying that, yes, we are drug trafficking, right? Because that's what the IRS thinks we're doing. We're saying, they're saying, hey, it doesn't matter. All you're doing is selling drugs here. And you're giving them a safe place to do drugs, essentially. And you're nothing but a crack house. That's what the IRS believes, right? That's what anybody who's like anti-psychedelics is like, that's their perspective. You're just a place to do drugs. And you're just drug trafficking, right? So, and so what we're saying is, yeah, we are, okay? And so therefore, we're gonna use a 471C methodology to track our inventory and therefore our cost of goods sold. And what we do is we now are saying, well, if in that case, facilitation services are cost of sales, the rooms in which people are doing sessions is a cost of sales. And of course, all of the medicine that we buy is a cost of sales, right? So we do a little bit of inventory acrobatics, and we put most all expenses into inventory, and then we match the sales with the inventory sold, which includes the facility costs, which includes the facilitation costs, and then we deduct it as cost of goods sold. And that's how we successfully move these otherwise disallowed deductions into cost of goods sold, thus being able to write them off under 280E. That was extremely long-winded. I apologize for how long that took to explain that. It is complicated. It is not without risk. None of these methods are without risk if you are in a plant touching business. But if you're not in a plant touching business, if you're like a facilitator, I think the risk for you is slim to none, because you're not trafficking, you're not touching the medicine, you're not manufacturing the medicine. Okay, so we got a comment. My understanding is First Citizens does not allow the one entity structure for psilocybin service centers. Is that correct? That is not. I don't believe that is correct. What they say is they just want to make sure that you're not depositing cash. That's what I've heard, unless they've gotten a little bit more rigid. So they don't. You have to do cash right now. When you buy that medicine from the manufacturer, from the growers, you have to pay them in cash. And then when you take money from the customer, it's usually in cash. And First Citizens the banking solution right now in Oregon is it doesn't allow you to deposit that cash. They will allow you to take credit card. I think they have some credit card merchant services. They'll allow you to bank the facility, and they'll allow you to bank the facilitation income. Okay, right on. So let's see, what other questions do we have? So let's see here. Back to Laura's question here. I'm a newly licensed psilocybin facilitator in Oregon. I'm wondering, you can share about legal banking. Okay, so banking is probably the biggest question. And first of all, again, facilitation is not trafficking. You are in a legal business. So you have the ability to get banking just like any other legal business. Should you lead with, I'm a psilocybin or a psychedelic facilitator? No. I would not go into the bank to open a bank account and say, I work in this psychedelic industry and the money I'm getting is from customers having psilocybin sessions. I would not lead with that. I would definitely go to any bank and say, I'm a business coach, or I'm not a business coach, I am a life coach. I am a counselor. I am anything you can legally get away with in the state that you're operating out of. You know what I'm saying? Without violating some other licensing policy. Like you can't say you're a therapist, right? Or something like that, unless you're a licensed therapist. But you can go in. I just recommend life coach. You need to get your LLC. I would recommend an LLC, at least in the state of Oregon. Costs $150. You can easily sign up with the Secretary of State online to get that. You want to apply for what's called an EIN number from the IRS's website. Be very careful not to go to a sponsored website and apply for an EIN number. Make sure you go to the irs.gov and apply for an EIN number. Okay, just make sure you know that you're working with them directly and not through some sort of sponsored company that's going to want money at the end of the application. You can do that online for free. You take the LLC and you take the EIN number, and then you go to your local bank and you want to open a business bank account. They say, what are you doing? You say you are a life coach, okay? Because otherwise it makes it muddy. Like if you go in and say like, hey, I'm doing facilitation for the psilocybin industry, they probably will tell you yes, but many of them will say no, okay? So that is what I would recommend. And I know Citizens Bank will also bank, for facilitation as well. So let's move on to entity structures and the type of entity you want to consider having if you're in a trafficking business. So if you are in a trafficking business, I highly recommend a C corporation. You can apply for an LLC, and then you can elect to be taxed as a C corporation, or you can just go straight out of the gate as an Inc., and then your default entity is what's called a C corporation. And the nice thing about the C corporation is it pays its own taxes. And if you were to get audited and then the IRS were to say, Justin is full of crap, we're gonna take you for everything you have, it stays in the C corporation structure. It stays there. It doesn't bleed out to you. Okay, you're not personally assessed. They can't put liens on your personal property. They only can come after the corporation. Okay, and that's why the C corporation for a trafficking business is preferable. Now that is for service centers. Okay, like if you're manufacturing, there is absolutely a legit reason to say that, my labor is cost of goods sold, my rent is cost of goods sold, my equipment is cost of goods sold. So you don't have to be as afraid of the fallout of 280E as like a service center. Service centers would be scrutinized a little bit more harshly, I think. than manufacturers. And so we're definitely into like a C corporation. And there's other benefits to a C corporation that people don't understand. You will hear people hate on C corporations, say like double taxation, all that stuff. That is not necessarily true. That is people hating on it that don't know C corporations, okay? But there's ways to get money out of the C corporation where you're not being double taxed, okay? So don't be afraid of the C corporation. For facilitation and for services, not non-plant touching, that's different. That's a legal business. And some people will say you still want to do the C corporation because we don't know if the IRS will come after them and be like, no, you're trafficking because you're sitting and helping people do drugs. I honestly don't think that's going to happen. I really feel like 99% sure that that's not going to happen. But there is that 1%, so I leave it up to you. But I think that's, if you're not touching the medicine, you're not selling the medicine, okay, then there isn't a worry about that. Now, each state has different rules, and I could go into like Colorado right now, which is very interesting laws. But to finish what I was saying, so in like the state of Oregon, if you're a facilitator, get an LLC, get an EIN number, get a bank account, start doing business, do your bookkeeping, use QuickBooks Online or at least Excel, and then you can elect to be taxed as what is called an S corporation, assuming you fit a minimal criteria for that. You can be an S corporation. A sole proprietorship gets an extra tax called self-employment tax. It's very easy to, as a sole proprietorship, to accumulate a lot of tax debt very quickly for very little money. And so the answer to that is an S corporation, where it has a little bit more tax benefit depending on what size you are. So I won't go into huge detail around that because I would leave that conversation up for your accountant. And in fact, Jason, I think we're going to probably collaborate on doing another like facilitator series and talk about, I would love to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of each of the business entities for people who are working in the space so that they can go informed and they don't have to pay somebody like me to teach them and charge them for it. You know what I mean? So, okay. So now the strategies that I've been talking about have been developed for the Oregon industry. In Colorado, who just is working on their regulated program now, they actually decriminalized. Oregon decriminalized and then recriminalized, which is awful. I think they really need to decriminalize, again, psychedelics, maybe not all the other bad stuff, but psychedelics, they really need to consider decriminalizing that again. But Oregon didn't, they got, I guess, the cart before the horse or whatever, the horse in the cart. I don't know what they did. But Colorado decriminalized, and they have some unique rules where you can go there right now and you can grow mushrooms, say, and you can give them to your clients, okay? And then you can ask for money for services, which is crazy, you know, like really, because that's what people were trying to do in the cannabis industry. They're like, hey, you're gonna pay us a club membership and then we're gonna give you weed and then we're not trafficking. I'm not selling cannabis. I'm selling memberships. I'm selling stickers. I'm selling a good time. And then for that fee, you can get cannabis from it. So I think the IRS will look at it that way. So we need to now be different. Like it needs to be done a little bit. You need to be careful as a facilitator going to Colorado, growing and giving your clients mushrooms, say, and then selling your services. Okay, so, but again, it's very defensible because the mushrooms are not how you're making your money. You're making your money on this from sitting with your clients, from doing integrations, from doing these services. That's how you're making the money. You're not being paid for selling the mushrooms. You gift the mushrooms, and then you do your facilitation services. So 280, I would do a C corporation for those businesses that are that are operating out of the unregulated market, I would do a C corporation for those businesses. I would use a 471C methodology to capture your deductions. And you just have to be more diligent about how you go forward with that. But what's cool is you can do it without a license, and you can do it anywhere. In Oregon, we've got like these very rigid places that you have to go. You can't go wander out in the woods. You know, you can't go have these amazing experiences in these optimal places. But I mean, it's still very beneficial. I'm not dissuading you, but I'm just saying that unfortunately the rules are pretty rigid in Oregon. In Colorado, no rules, like almost, you know. So, and then they're developing their regulated market too, in case you want to be within a regulated. So I'm going to pause now, and I think I've hashed out a lot. I can go on and on. So, but I think we want to definitely leave time for questions, and then Jason probably has some. Did you want to comment on any of the things that I was saying? Do you have anything to add to the discussion?
I think all this information is really great, and you know, from what we hear from the industry is, you know, it's just kind of a confusion, you know, particularly with folks that are wearing two hats, you know, that are both facilitators and service centers. And at our conference, you had a great resource that you handed out, that book. Is that something that has kind of a lot of this in
Yeah. And you know what? It needs to be updated again, but it's still very, very relevant. We've got this like handout, and I do have a PDF form of it, and it does have some really good information. It goes over essentially what I've been talking about, but you know, I'm doing a 2-hour presentation in 40 minutes, and this is kind of like that. So there's a lot more, but that kind of will get you started. And I can, if you want to email me, Justin at calixcpa.com. Hayden, if you could put that up somehow, that would be great. Justin at calixcpa.com. Let's see if we got any other questions here. Okay, at the risk of having your bank account closed as they find your psilocybin adjacent and not. So there's a lively conversation about banking, and that is true. Like, I would not open, even if you're a facilitator, I would not open a bank account at a bank that you're doing your personal finances with. Or if you have another business, I would choose a completely separate bank. I doubt they're going to close you down, because you're probably not going to be banking a lot of cash, I hope. Take credit cards, or do that. Cash is really the thing that triggers the bank to do an investigation on you and to see what you're really doing. But I think and then also if you go through a credit union, something like that, a little less sophisticated on their compliance department, then they probably will never catch up to you. And so, the thing about big banks, if you go to a big bank and you like go with Chase or something like that, or US Bank, and you open a bank account and then they flag you, it flags all of the big banks. All the big banks share a database, and they'll flag all of them. So I'd recommend a separate bank. You don't want to run the risk of having them close your business bank accounts or your personal bank accounts. But I would recommend just attempting to get a regular legal bank for, again, life coaching. That's what you're doing, life coaching, or maybe you are a licensed therapist or a nurse or a nurse practitioner. Those kinds of things. You can have a bank account for doing that kind of service. So that's what I would recommend. Yep. So FC. Who's FC? Oh, First Citizens.
First Citizens.
Yeah. First Citizens is trying to be in compliant, and I think they're new to it. They're like new to this. I don't think they were a cannabis bank before. And so they probably will continue to evolve their banking offering, and make it probably continue to make it more rigid. Another good subject to talk about cannabis's rescheduling to Schedule 3 and how that's going to affect the psychedelics industry. Jason, do you want to touch on that, or should we just leave it open for questions?
I think questions, and then as you mentioned of us doing this series coming up, that if folks, if they have any particular topics that they would really like covered. So the more I learn about this and hear from you, not an accountant, but as a business guy, just how complex and these layers and layers and layers, particularly when people are swapping hats, and that seems to be where a lot of folks of how do they manage being in one and then being in another, and being in both. And for mental health therapists and the licensed individuals that come from, outside of OPS licensure, but, mental health or clinical, licensures, it's the liability aspect of getting into this field and not ruining their personal livelihood. And that is huge topic of balance. These are brave folks that are, on the edge, but have their hands in all these different pots. So how do they make it so that they're not just going to ruin their life if something happens?
That's a really good point. Like I'm talking about just IRS, like the risk that you're running with the IRS, but there's all sorts of how is the federal government going to, there's multiple enforcement companies that have nothing to do but pick on the people in this space. So I haven't seen any of that yet. I don't believe that psychedelics will be as scrutinized as it was with cannabis, because again, cannabis is a commodities business and this is more of service business. There's all sorts of other bigger fish to fry. So you as a service provider, I don't think that they're gonna come down on you. But I cease to be amazed. I know that the Homeland Security has been running around. They're very much profit oriented. They'll close businesses down for any little infraction. If you have an employee that has a warrant for their arrests in a different state, they can come in and close down your whole operation, ruin it, seize the property, seize the land. And then what they do, and what's happened here in Oregon, is they'll seize the property and then they'll resell it to them, resell it back to the owners for 50 cents on the dollar, something like that. So if that's not profiteering, I don't know what it is. But Homeland Security has wreaked havoc here, and that's what? Who's that? Do they do that? Well, they do, yeah. And there's other, there's the DEA and the federal government, and there's other agencies that have a license to, at this point, have a license to enforce, unless they've been told otherwise. The DEA was unfunded for enforcing medical cannabis, meaning they're not allowed to go shut down medical, licensed medical operations in the cannabis industry. But nothing like that has happened for psychedelics at this point. But I do know that it is I do know from a federal enforcement standpoint, there's a lot of liberties being taken. In the cannabis industry, we've got what's called the THCA loophole from the Farm Bill, and there are people selling marijuana online, essentially, as hemp. So if you look up THCA, that is a cannabinoid that's a precursor to THC. Once you combust it, it becomes marijuana that has a psychoactive intoxicating effect. That is marijuana, THCA, but because the Farm Bill doesn't allow doesn't say specifically that it includes THCA as hemp. People are selling THCA as hemp, but it is marijuana. That's what it is. So you can buy marijuana online now if you want to. Just if you feel like you need to. And so there, I don't see a lot of enforcement action happening there, even though there's a lot of states with more rigid hemp regulations saying that, yeah, THCA is marijuana, we don't want to sell it. we don't want it sold, but you can go to like Utah they have a medical program, new medical program, but they're also selling marijuana in gas stations and minute markets all across the United States. No testing, no packaging. It's actually kind of a problem. And they're working on legislation now to fix that. But as far as like, I see the same thing happening with mushrooms. You can buy psilocybin mushrooms online, mostly in capsule forms. And I'm not going to name any names, but if you need to buy psilocybin online, you can. Yeah. So I think that they're probably the ones that, if there's going to be enforcement action, they're going to be the ones that are looked at first.
I was reading a really interesting article that the folks selling things are calling magic mushrooms, which just I think people are automatically going to psilocybin, but there are other mushroom bases, the animes, and that coming out, and how that kind of complicates similarly, that it could have a negative effect on the industry, because people, those are not psychoactive. They're closer to an alcohol type of reaction to it. So people thinking that they're getting one thing, getting another, but what does that mean? And listening to what you were saying just about the industry, the government agencies being involved, I wonder, what are your thoughts of, like, as all of this becomes more aware to the IRS, do you think there's an increased likelihood that they'll get more, like, they'll want to be more involved in, like, setting an example? Because that's what my concern is. If we're pushing the envelope too much, somebody's going to come in and knock on the door and make an example of somebody, which hurts the overall movement.
Yeah, I think so. So historically, with the IRS trying to set an example, Harborside, some of these cannabis operators that they have really taken to the cleaners, they actually ended up losing those court cases due to a lack of substantiation and good record keeping. Believe it or not, they did not actually lose due to 280E, even though that was mentioned in these court cases. But really, they lost due to bad bookkeeping, essentially. So what I would say is that as far as I honestly don't think that if you've got a really well prepared tax return with good bookkeeping and good substantiation, I honestly don't think it'll go far in terms of going up the tax court ladder. I think that they will be motivated to settle. Now, I was told for a long time, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and you're going to hear that. And that's not true. It's not true. It's not a matter of if or when. It is if you get audited. Depending on the auditor's perspective, they may work with you, or they may just say no, 280E applies, and then you have to go to the tax court of appeals. With a C corporation, okay, remember that even if you lose that argument, the tax is retained in the C corporation. They cannot come after you personally. You walk away from that. Okay, you have to once you get to the tax court of appeals, if they're hell no, this guy Justin's a complete idiot, he has no idea what he's talking about, then you just decide, do I want to take it to tax court, all the way up the ladder, and argue the 471C methodology, argue the CHAMPS methodology, or is it not worth it? I'm going to walk away from this. You walk away from it. The worst, what would happen in that case is you would need to sell the assets of the corporation, the license and improvements, or don't keep your land in the C corporation, okay? Don't buy property and put it in the C corporation. That's in a different partnership entity or something like that, or on your personal tax return, it's in a different LLC, okay? The property is all your C corporation has is the license and the improvements that you made to get into operation. That's it. You sell those, okay, to another company for a fair value, okay, so that the IRS is I think you're cheating. I think you're trying to get out of it. No, we sold the assets out of this corporation for fair market value. They're going to take that money that you bought that license for, which cost you $10,000 a year, right? It's already been, okay. But so I don't know, like it'd have to be, you'd sell it for less than 10,000, I guess, because they could just go get another one, right? You could just go get another one, or you let it dissolve and go get another one. But you walk away from that corporation. That's my point, okay? And then you're free and clear of that. I'm not saying it's a simple process, but it is a process that can happen. It's your fallback. It's your safety net, okay? So you let the accountants be helpful as we can be, prepare well-prepared returns, good bookkeeping, good record keeping, good substantiation, okay? You have a C corporation, you do business, you help a lot of people, and then if there's fallout, the IRS wants to make a spectacle of you, you take it only so far, unless you want to take it, and if you want to be that person, think you've got a really good argument for winning in tax court, or you walk away from that and you start business again. You take the branding, you continue business, but under a different entity. That's my answer to that. So I don't know if they're going to try to make a spectacle of the industry.
Yeah.
They have a lot of big fish to fry. They got ERC. They've got they gave out $2 trillion of ERC. A big part of that money was not deserved, or they didn't, the people who got it did not meet the qualifications. Those are easier. Those are lower hanging fruit. So I don't know if they want to mess with the industry. Yeah, so you can email me, and then occasionally I do presentations like this. We'll record this, but if you're ready to go into business, or you're in business as a service center, a trafficking business, I'm happy to have those conversations with anybody who wants to kind of give me more information about them, and then I can let them know if 471C is a good way to do it. And then again, I'm not saying the bifurcation model is a bad one. It's one that most of my clients are using now. And then I've got a few that are all in one, kind of like what I would recommend, just to keep it simple. But this bifurcation model is also a way to go. It's just a little bit more complex. It's a little bit more expensive to manage. So those are the options. Jason, you have anything else, or do we do this?
Oh, this is incredible. And I was thinking we can talk, won't put you on the spot, but maybe as part of this series is that we could also have, host some just open Q&A times, that would really be friendly, specifically, for the psilocybin industry. I feel like a lot of people have the same questions, and I'm seeing a great resource coming out that would pretty much be like, step one, here's your A and B options, but really leading down to how do we protect? And, I think a lot of people want that it's like, hey, yeah, First Citizens is great. And Marcia Sheets, she's the one really advocating through First Citizens. Had a great conversation with her, and she's driving it. But, are there other ones, or how do we get more banks involved?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a slow process. As far as I know, there aren't any. I imagine that after rescheduling, there's going to be some pivoting by the banks that were in cannabis to do psychedelics as the state regulated markets come online. Right now, Oregon is the only one that's actively operating. And so I don't think there's a lot of money to be made there by them. So I don't see a lot of people, a lot of banks just jumping on. They never did in the cannabis industry. Their MAPS, this one called MAPS, is the only one, not to be confused with the psychedelics MAPS, but the bank called MAPS in Oregon was the primary provider of banking for the cannabis industry in Oregon. And then there was a few others that came and went. There probably are a few that people are using. Otherwise, we get these national bank, these national what would we call them? I don't know. They're platforms that work with banks to bank in the cannabis industry, and you go through them and they do all the compliance work, and then they kind of sit on top of another bank that doesn't want to market, that they're in the business of doing cannabis. And so, yeah, and so I think there's going to be those providers will pop up. But we are at the very early stages of this industry. It's, to me, even though it's been around for thousands of years, it's very much a new technology. My clients are feeling this because it's actually kind of hard to sell this, which is odd, because anybody who has done these sessions knows that it's like one of the best experiences of their life. But yet there's a lot of people not wanting to go that way. I have this funny anecdote. I was over at my brother-in-law's house, and he was dealing with a lot of stress. And he said that, hey, I'm either going to start drinking or I want an edible, like I want a cannabis edible. And she said, start drinking. You know what I mean? Like, that's how bad it is. Let alone, like, hey, I'm going to drink alcohol or I'm going to eat mushrooms. You know, like, do you think she's going to be like, oh, eat mushrooms? Hell no. She's going to be like, start drinking a case of beer every night or something like that. You know what I mean? but as we know, like, the way to get off of alcohol and alcoholism is psychedelics, right? So we know that this is medically beneficial. So.
I just really appreciate everything that you're doing within the industry and offering this, because we're building the plane while we're taking it off. And any of the, the professional communities that, often get, forgotten about in the beginning when everything is being created, now are the ones that are really, can, like, the information that you have and, the importance of having somebody that really is advised. It's too bad it's an afterthought. So hopefully, as these other states come in line, that this can be a part of it, and they can be learning from what our mistakes and our
guaranteed. I'm sure. That's the way it's done. And Jason, thank you too. Thanks for the invitation to work with you, and I look forward to doing some more collaboration.
Yes, all about collaboration. Thank you, Justin.